Alrighty, we will get started. It seems like our number's starting to stabilize. So thank you everyone for showing up to our first Rice Design speaker event this year. We're super excited to bring in guest speakers who can help provide more insight into pursuing design at Rice, pursuing design at industry, and everything in between. So for our first speaker, for a quick introduction, we have Tina Liu. So Tina is a senior from SID who's studying sociology. From branding to visual journalism to product design, Tina's been designing since she was a sophomore in high school. After switching her major 3 times as a sophomore, she decided to finally make the jump from being pre-med to being a product designer. She's worked as an art director for the Rice Thresher of Rice, human-computer interaction research assistant, and a UX design intern that helped launch a Brooklyn skincare startup, and most recently, a product design intern at Hulu, where her work is now being launched. So yeah, if everyone could give Tina a really warm welcome, we really appreciate that. Yeah, and so for a quick overview of what tonight's event's gonna look like, we are gonna have 2 sections of 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes is just for Tina to kind of talk about, some of her progression in design, including how to pursue design at Rice, her career path thus far, as well as more specifics on her internship at Hulu. So that's the first 30 minutes. And then for the next 30 minutes, we're gonna open up to everyone else for just Q&A. We'll ask a few questions to start it off, and then anyone else who has specific questions is free to kind of hop in and join the discussion. So yeah, overall, we want to make this this is pretty informal. This is here for you guys to get more insight into design and start learning more about it as a potential academic and career path. So yeah, Tina, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, great. So can I actually be allowed to share my screen?
Yes, sure. One sec.
Cool. Oh no, I got it. Yeah, thank you. Okay, cool. So just to give a little bit of an overview of what I'll be talking about today, I'll start off with an introduction into who I am, how to get into designing, and the recruiting timeline and everything. My journey into design, which is a little bit messy, but I think you guys will like it, and then a little bit more about the specifications about how I interned at a startup and also at Hulu, and then I'll open up to any questions you guys might have. So just a little bit about me. I'm currently in Houston. I'm studying sociology. I'm at SID. I'm graduating December 2020. Currently the art director at Rice, and between all of my different experiences, I worked at Atolla, which is a startup in Brooklyn, a skincare startup, and then at Hulu, where I worked on 2 teams, which was 1 viewer growth and then 2 personalization. But before I get into all of the nitty gritty, that type of stuff, I kind of wanted to give an introduction to just design in general, in case some of you guys are a little bit new to this. So I kind of divided it up into UX, UI, and product, just to differentiate the 2 or the 3 when you guys are applying for jobs. So user experience or UX design is typically how does the overall experience feel. So how easy is the process? Is the overall flow efficient? So an example would be if you're shopping somewhere online, how easy is it for a user to be able to get from the landing page all the way to checkout, and how many steps is it? How frustrating is it? Are they easily able to reach their cart? How do they change the number of things in the cart, etc.? User interface or UI is how the overall experience look. So typically what that means is how are things spaced out? How does the hierarchy look? How does that influence how users register things visually? And then product design is a little bit of both. So you'll typically have to have the skills needed for UX and UI, but on the other hand, you'll also have to know a little bit more about business. So how does the overall experience affect business? An example would be, where does this need to be in 2 years? How do we align both the user goals and with the business goals and make both the parties happy? The recruiting timeline is a little bit long compared to if you guys have some CS major friends who's typically recruiting timelines right in the fall. The UX design recruiting timeline is typically throughout the entire year. So between August and October is when you'll get your portfolio into shape. Anything that you worked on during the summer gets added here. And then between October and December is where fall recruiting starts. So this is companies like Facebook or Lyft. And then between December and February, that's when spring recruiting starts for UX, and that includes companies like Google or Amazon. And then between February and April is typically when you'll start finalizing recruiting, getting your offers, etc. And if you find yourself kind of like left straggling, that's also when startup recruiting starts up. And I included 2 different resources at the bottom in case you guys just want to keep up with how design recruiting starts. They list a lot of different great opportunities, whether it's you're interested in doing startups or just going into the industry. Both are great resources to get into recruiting. So just wanted to give a little overview of how recruiting works. So I would say like there are 4 really important aspects of getting prepared for recruiting. The first one is definitely having your portfolio ready and making sure that you're showcasing your work in like the best way possible. So especially if you're applying for a UX job, you want to make sure that your portfolio is UX friendly. So if a recruiter is looking at your portfolio, making sure that it's easily navigable, making sure that it speaks to you as a designer, because that's also a piece of work that you're kind of showcasing as your portfolio. And make sure that it tells a story. So make sure that it speaks to your design process. Make sure that you're including everything from like mistakes, things that you like might have learned, things that maybe you messed up on this or you found that the solution just wasn't right. Also making sure that you include that because it shows that you are like a self-learner, making sure that you take feedback well. And the second thing would definitely be that your resume is easily readable. I think a lot of junior designers fall into this trap where they think like, if I'm applying for a design job, my resume has to be like designed really heavily and have all these like beautiful colors and these images and everything. But at the end of the day, if a recruiter can't easily read your resume, there's really no point in how much work you're putting in to design your resume because like they're not going to read it essentially. And make sure that it only has design related experiences. I think this was a trap that I fell into my sophomore year when I was still when a lot of my experiences were still like pre-med experiences, so I included those, but I feel like those were detrimental to like my whole recruiting process because it didn't really show that I had a huge focus or direction or path into design. The third thing is definitely interviewing, so making sure that you're prepared to do interviews, especially once you cross that phone screening line, making sure that you understand why you want to become a designer, like what's your design process, and like what are your future goals and aims as a designer. And the fourth thing is definitely being able to present. So a lot of the times during recruiting processes, they'll ask you to present something, and that making sure that your presentation is designed well is super important because at the end of the day, if you're a designer, typically anything that you showcase to other people should be designed well. So a typical UX design interview will have at least 3 of these things. So the first one is a phone screening where you'll hop on a call with the recruiter, you'll talk about why you want to become a designer, why that company specifically, all that very basic stuff. The second thing that you'll probably do is a portfolio presentation where you'll choose like 1 or 2 of your projects that you're really proud of and talk through them through the entire process, and then they'll ask you questions about it, so you have to be prepared about essentially anything that you design, understanding why you made those choices. And the third thing is an individual interview. So you'll typically be matched with a senior designer or a manager, and they'll ask you more specific questions like, what's your design process, and being able to lead them through that entire process with them. The 2 at the bottom kind of varies on the company depending on like what the company is and what they're looking for, but one thing that you might encounter during an interview process is a design critique, which is essentially where you'll be matched with the designer and you'll hop on the phone with them, and then they'll ask you to download a random app or maybe an app that's on your phone, and you'll just talk through the entire design of that app, whether it's like this aligns with the business goals or these are inconsistencies within that design. It kind of just tests how well your design eye is trained and being able to detect like certain things like animations or movements and how the entire app operates. And then the fifth one obviously might depend on the company again. You might have to do design challenge, which is essentially where they give you a prompt and you have to design for that prompt within 3 to 7 days, whether it's from researching all the way down to prototyping. essentially it's like this huge jam session for yourself in which you just kind of jam out an entire app essentially for this company. So going into my design journey, like how I got into design, I started off in high school where I was a designer on a yearbook staff, became editor-in-chief, and like managed the whole book design. That's also where I got into photography and got into like browsing through Pinterest all day and everything. And then once I got into college, I started off my freshman year as a designer on the Thresher staff. I worked on a bunch of random design side projects, whether it's from designing Sid merch or helping the SA rebrand their logo, etc. And then my junior year, I became the art director of the Thresher. And just to like reiterate just how deeply involved in pre-med that I was before my sophomore year, I literally was doing a bunch of research and was designing like scientific posters and all that. So if you feel like you might be too late in the game, you're definitely not. So that spring of sophomore year, I decided that I just wasn't going to be pre-med anymore. And during that time, I did the Kleiner Perkins Design Challenge, which kind of just introduced me to UX as a whole. That challenge essentially asks you to just redesign any one of their apps. I submitted like 100 plus applications to companies, like literally 100 plus companies. And I got rejected a bunch. And I ended up spending that summer at a startup, which gave me the opportunity to go to Brooklyn and work as their UX design intern before they launched. And after they launched, they invited me back to work part-time during my fall semester, my junior year, as their first UX designer. So going into like a little bit about that whole startup experience, you don't have to read all this, but essentially Atolla is this personalized skincare company. It's really multi-step. They send you a bunch of skincare kits and the user essentially has to scan through them, do this entire process, and it's a really complicated process. And one of the things that we found within our beta testers when I first joined was that there was a huge drop-off because people were getting confused or it just wasn't clear. So how do we make sure that users stay engaged during that whole process? So the first thing I did as the UX design intern was I was able to design 6 of their email templates that they still use today in HTML and CSS. This is really cool to be able to see just like how UX can be. I think there's this misinterpretation that it's just designing apps or just designing websites, but you're also designing things like emails or things for TV or other things like that. So this was a really cool experience because like I had never designed for emails before, and being able to understand like how do users typically read through emails? What are the things that jump out to them? What are things that are most useful to them? During that summer, I also did this whole thing where essentially when a user gets a testing strip, they have to scan it through the web app. And one of the things that we found was really frustrating users was that a lot of the times their phone wasn't scanning things correctly. And you couldn't move forward until you got it correct, essentially. And one thing that we found was that if users were just stuck at that step, it probably led to them just leaving the app completely, probably giving up on the whole test, or probably like, this is a scam, I never want to do this again. So when I got into the company, I essentially rerouted that entire user flow into only allowing users to have 2 tries in their scanning steps. And if they failed those steps, or if the camera just wasn't working, etc., they'd be led to a manual mode where they're able to compare the testing strip that they have physically to one of the example strips that might be on the screen. So one of the great things about startups, and which I highly recommend everyone to like just get experience in, is that you get to wear a lot of hats. So I was able to do UX design, but I was also able to do like just traditional graphic design, packaging design, design for social media, help them launch their entire Instagram, help them design their launch party. So it was like a super unique experience that I like haven't had before. And I was also able to do things like product photography, which is super cool. So just something to know about startups is that you get to have like so many different experiences, especially if you're not super set on doing UX design, you're also able to have the flexibility to learn a bunch of other things as well. So going to my fall semester of my junior year, I also worked part-time. And one of the cool things that I was able to do was redesign their landing page. So essentially how this whole process worked was we had 3 example landing pages and we tested them with users to see what the bounce rate was. So what I mean by bounce rate is essentially once they arrive on that page, when do they leave? So we're testing like if they arrive on the page and they leave immediately, that means something's wrong. And so based on that data, we were able to redesign the entire landing page up that bounce or decrease that bounce rate down like 20%. So it was super cool just being able to see the numbers and seeing how real users actually interacted with things once things launched. So my fall 2020 experience, I whipped my portfolio into shape. I joined the Human Computer Interaction Lab at Rice, where I did research. And then I was also able to interview with a bunch of different companies, and I finally went with Hulu, and I literally love the company now. Like, I can't say enough good things. The pictures here are the 2 teams that I worked on with this summer, and they were just amazing and wonderful. So one thing that I'll definitely say is a tip for you guys is that like definitely don't value prestige over company culture, because it's definitely easier to be miserable at something that's like a prestigious company versus being like really happy and being able to take ownership over a project at maybe a less prestigious company. So at Hulu, I worked on two teams. So the first team that I worked on was viewer growth. During this time, I was able to work on their 404 error pages. So these are kind of examples of what they used to look like or what they currently look like right now. So it's really bland, lacks a lot of brand voice. There's not really anything to it except for like moving them back into the homepage, which can be like completely different experience from like the personalized experience that Hulu wants to give as a company. So this is just like a little bit information of like how the whole designing process works at a company. Basically, you'll get numbers, you'll do a bunch of research. And so between June 4th, 2020 and June 20th, 2020, we saw that 110,000 users landed on an error page, which is a lot of users. So there's just this opportunity for Hulu to be able to optimize the error page to increase subscribers and also prevent bouncing. So if we see that bounce rate is 63%, that means 63% of people who get an error page leave Hulu immediately. And that's not great for a company that wants to like gain new users, gain new subscribers. So there's a ton more background research, this bunch of competitive analysis, just looking at like, what does Netflix do for their error pages? What does Amazon Prime do for their error pages? What do things that are outside of the industry, like maybe Airbnb or Spotify, do for their error pages? And be able to learn from those different companies and how they are succeeding or maybe not succeeding with their error pages. Doing background research like what do users really want from an error page, and etc. That's those kind of things. And I think there's this misconception that design is really straightforward. I think like you'll hear that a lot from people who don't really know about design. They'll just kind of be like, you just kind of design it. But this is just an example of how many different concepts I went through before actually landing on something that I was happy with and something that's actually getting launched now. So this is essentially the mobile version of what I worked on during the summer. So on the left, you'll see like what it looks like right now, which is just like very bland. Lacks a lot of brand voice. It's not really fun. But then I worked with UX copy, which is like the people who write all of the words on the page. Worked with legal. And when I say like there's UX design is one of the most like multidisciplinary, like cross-disciplinary areas in tech. I'm so serious. Like you just work with across everybody. And so on the right sides, you'll see like a design for both non-subscribers and subscribers. So they kind of differentiate a little bit. So in the middle is where the non-subscribers land, and you'll be able to like use the little scrubber, explore the content. And one of the goals of this project was being able to start a free trial or navigating people more towards subscribing. So that was one thing that we wanted to do as a goal, and that's how we like fulfilled it. And then on the right is where our subscribers would lead to. So being able to make sure that they are able to be led towards a more back to home or being able to explore more content, just making sure that we're engaging users as much as possible. Yeah, so when I say like interdisciplinary work, I mean, I was able to work with developers, work with legal, marketing, other designers, design managers, product managers, researchers, etc., all to just kind of make that one page. And so across that, you'll also learn how to make sure that you're be able to pass off your work to developers. So whether it's through blueprinting or making sure that all the specs are spec'd out, like all those kind of things, I think a lot of people don't realize happen behind the scenes to make sure that everything's consistent, everything is to the designer specification. So here I'm kind of just blueprinting out what exactly, how long the animation times are, where specifically I want things to be, how far apart do I want them to be, and all those kind of different things. So the second project I worked on towards the latter half of my summer was making this new feature at Hulu, which is called Playlists. Essentially, it was more of like a proof of concept versus something that was just going to be launched immediately. But this was something that they really wanted to do for a long time because this is the #1 requested feature at Hulu right now amongst the user community. And so being able to show the executives that this is something that's possible, something that users want, is something that they really wanted me to be able to demonstrate. So here's just like the post that has a bunch of different votes about how they really miss Hulu having a queue and also being able to choose the order of which they are able to watch things. Again, lots of research, lots of competitive analysis, working with user research, VX Insights about how frustrating is this for users? Do they really want this? Is this something that we can fix in a way that's efficient and high impact? And I worked during my design team, with my design team, I worked with them to do this whole like launch project where essentially we were figuring out what features exactly we were aiming for. So when you think of playlists, like that could mean so many different things. That could mean you want to change the cover art of that playlist, but is that something that's really high impact and low effort? Like what are the features that we really want to zone in on to make sure that we're like pinpointing the user pains like immediately, and then other things can be added on later in time because they're just more nice to haves. So being able to work with the design team is something that I was really new to because obviously there's not a huge design community when I started doing design. So yeah, just working with a bunch of designers, getting their feedback, getting their thoughts was something that was super cool and super interesting. And so yeah, I just wanted to like showcase a little bit of my work. So I was able to design for a living room device. So specifically here I'm designing for a TV using a Roku remote. I've never designed for a TV before, but Hulu's biggest user base is on TV. So I definitely wanted to try my hand at it and see like what's the difference between designing for a TV where you can only really move between like 4 quadrants versus a website where you can hover, where you can make a new tab, where you can double click things, where you can drag things, etc. When you are limited to just a remote, how does that change how you design things and how you view things? And it was definitely super, super hard at first because you definitely have a lot more limitations as to like what exactly you can do. But it definitely was a really great experience. And so here I'm just showing you how you would add an episode to a playlist and how it would be confirmed. And I was also able to just kind of like flesh the whole thing out. So this might be the landing page for like if you go into your playlist, if you want to play through it, shuffle through it, add it to your stuff, etc. Also adding in something like recommended content. So if you reach the end of your playlist, being able to recommend things so that users continue to discover new things, continue to discover things that are, make the whole experience feel more personalized. And make sure that users also feel like they can customize Hulu to the way that they want Hulu to operate for them. So yeah, just a part of designing that I feel like a lot of people miss out on is user testing. So one thing that I had the privilege of being able to experience at Hulu was going through user testing. So I ended up having 6 users test through a bunch of different functions, just being able to see how easy each task was and whether they struggled with certain things. and all that kind of stuff, and using their feedback to iterate off of it. So making changes to my design based off of actual user feedback. So a lot of times we as designers can get in the kind of mindset of like, well, like I think it's intuitive, but once you present it to someone who's never seen it before, has no idea what you're talking about, that might change. So being able to get user feedback from people who will directly use your product is something that's super important. So based off of that feedback, we changed that design into, so one thing that they said was they wanted a more visual cue for when they add something to a playlist. So it can be as simple as adding a check mark here, which is just like, you just add a check mark, make a little animation, maybe make that text bigger, and you will solve that pain point. So not everything needs something that's like a huge redesign. Something very simple can like solve a problem really quickly. We also changed this, which was the cover art. So instead of having something where it's kind of grayed out or blacked out, we kind of changed it to have a gradient from the bottom up, just to showcase the variety of shows that user might be interested in, etc. If there was something that they didn't curate, and they were just adding it from another user, or maybe Hulu curated it, just being able to showcase all the different things in a more upfront way was something that was really important. So on the note of like finding opportunities, I think my biggest advice is get your portfolio in shape. I think one of the like things that we like, I think we a lot of times when we're applying for jobs, we really think like your resume is the most important thing as it shows like everything you've done or etc. But really a lot of recruiters will like tell you that like the first thing that they look at is your portfolio. So making sure that your portfolio is in shape is super, super, super important. Like I can't stress that enough. Like oftentimes they might not even look at your resume. They'll just like based off of your work as a designer, that your portfolio represents you as a designer the best. How it's designed, what kind of work you're showing, and all that kind of stuff is super important. So just some final tips. Just making sure you like definitely don't feel disadvantaged just because you go to Rice and you don't go to like RISD or Parsons or any other design school specifically, or there's no like UX design major at Rice. Like just don't feel discouraged by that fact. There's like a lot more of you guys than you might think. And yeah, imposter syndrome is real. Like continue to be curious, ask questions, like just connect with other professionals or other students who were on the same path as you or are also on the same path as you. I know like when I started at Hulu and the other product design intern, she was like from UW, which has like this great interaction design program. And I remember like feeling like really like intimidated because I was like, I don't have an educational background on this. Like a lot of this is self-taught. Just don't be discouraged by that. Like there's a reason why you have why you got the job you did, and there's like definitely opportunities for you to continue to grow as a designer and definitely opportunities for you to learn. And don't be discouraged by rejections. Like literally you saw that like I applied to like 100 plus places, got rejected by like 99 of them. So just don't be discouraged by rejections, because at the end of the day, there's still opportunities for you to learn. There's still like, just stay the course, because there's like something that's good that will fit you the best and give you the best opportunity for you to learn. And don't be invalidated by developers. I feel like I've had a bunch of different experiences with like software engineers or developers where there's like this huge emphasis that just because they're like more engineering or they're more in STEM that like they might be better than you or their opinion matters more than you. But at the end of the day, like you're the reason why users are using the product. You're the reasons why people stay engaged in a product, because at the end of the day, if something's designed poorly, no one's going to use it. Like it's very obvious when something's designed poorly. So make sure that you understand your importance within like a company, within technology, in your relation with developers, and make sure to stand up for yourself in that way. Design is a valid and reachable career goal. Like there's definitely no problem with like going into design. Like it's definitely something that's reachable. Just because it's niche doesn't mean it's impossible to get into or something that only really highly skilled people can get into. Just make sure that you understand like yeah, like I can do this, and like this is something that like maybe not a lot of people have heard of. Maybe it's not something that's like people consider the most like high reaching job. Maybe it's not valued as much amongst my peers as like an engineer or etc. But just know that like your job is incredibly important to like just how things are used every day, and it's like a super valid career goal. Be good at taking feedback. All feedback is useful, whether it's from your friends, professionals, etc. Like just be good at taking it, taking criticism, just taking it with a grain of salt, making sure that you're incorporating it within everything that you learn, because everybody has different opinions. Your users are not going to be you copied 20 times and just be you that like identical to your mindset using the things that you're designing. So just make sure that you're open to everything. I have to reiterate this again, that I touched on earlier, was that don't get caught up in prestige. Like something, for example, like if there's like a huge company that you know, like your friends will like, all your friends know, your parents know about the company, just don't get caught up in like the prestige. Make sure that the company culture is something you want to engage in, because at the end of the day, like you're the one that's going to be working there. And if you're miserable, but you're like, well, it looks good on my resume, that's not a really sustainable like path for you to go down. So just make sure you're taking in company culture as much as you can, because that's going to really affect your day-to-day life, how you interact with people, how you stay connected with people after. And my last thing is that switch career paths whenever. Literally, it's never too late to switch career paths. You can be a sophomore, literally like me, who's finished like 3/4 of a biochem degree, and just be like, actually, I don't want to do that anymore. So whether you're a sophomore, junior, senior, you're graduated, there's like no bad time for you to be like, actually, like this isn't for me. Like I want to switch into something that's different. But yeah, that's it. I'll be free to take any questions now.
Yeah, Tina, thank you so much. This has been great. I want to start off with one question in the chat, kind of going off what you were just saying. And the question was, how do you get a sense of culture, especially with virtual interviews?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think one thing that you can tell by just virtual interviews is just how much they value interns. So is someone checking in on you when you don't reply to like a question or something like that? So that's something that helped me decide between Amazon and Hulu. Was like, Hulu, the recruiters through the entire process, they were always checking in on me. When you talk to the interviewers, you can tell like they really value your time. They're thanking you for your time. They're being engaging. They're actually listening to you. So just making sure that I think you get a good feel of how the people that you're interacting with during your entire interview process are, like just how the people are, because those people represent that company better than anybody else can.
Cool. And then I'll ask just a few questions to get us started off here with the Q&A and continue on. So one thing you mentioned is the importance of like building up your portfolio as soon as possible for the recruiting process. So I think a lot of people probably in this meeting, myself to some extent included, are feeling like we don't know how to like go about starting to build a portfolio if we don't have, you know, like previous design experience or exposure to that. So what are your recommendations for like what are some like easy to learn or use tools to get started in design? And then how do you kind of go about like starting to find projects to build up your portfolio?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I think, in my opinion, the probably best tool across like Mac users and Windows users, because I used to recommend Sketch, but then like that was only available on Mac. But I think one tool to get you integrated into design as a whole is just Figma. Like just mess around with it, understand like how to do like different interactions on it. It's really, really easy to use once you get a hang of it. And I think building off of that, the projects that you do at first don't have to be like this massive new app or anything like that. It can literally just be like, I'm on Spotify. I want to be able to see what my friends are listening to on the mobile version. And that can just be your project. Like it can be as simple as like, I just want to add this feature, or like, I think this, just adding this feature would be really cool to an app, and being able to explain that process during like on your portfolio, being like, I really think this is missing out because here's the background research that I did for this. And it can be a super simple design. You don't even have to like rebrand them. You can just build off of what the current design is. And I think that's the easiest way to start off your portfolio, is being able to use something that already exists. So Spotify's like design system is already like beautiful, amazing. And being able to take that, build off of it, and be able to explain like why you added certain things, that can be probably the easiest way to get that portfolio going. If you find other ways to add to that, that could be just like side projects. So when I first started off, my portfolio had a lot of just like, I had stuff like designing merch. It can be anything, just like just to show that you like are interested in design. It doesn't have to be this whole thing about like designing an entire app, entire website, or anything like that. But just make sure that your portfolio looks nice, navigates nice. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I guess for a quick shameless plug, we do have a Figma workshop coming up. So we'll have more information on that coming soon, but stay tuned for that for sure. One other kind of question we had was how, as like a Rice student, like say you're a freshman or sophomore, kind of having this budding interest in design, what would you recommend in terms of opportunities at Rice in beyond the design club, of course, to like start getting involved with design and like finding projects to work on, people to learn from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I wish someone had this answer when I was a sophomore. But I think one thing is being able to network. I think that's a huge thing, is like just hop on LinkedIn, go talk to people, like reach out to like other designers, reach out to people in the professional world, and just like see what's up, like see what's going on. But opportunities at Rice specifically, I know they're super, super limited. But try to turn your classes, specifically ones that are maybe like more project based, into like maybe like a UX design project. So one thing that I did for my SOCI research methods class was the whole class was essentially just like build anything, like research anything that's like sociology related. And how I turned that into like a more design related thing that I was able to add to my portfolio was being like, how does the website of Rice Resources impact low income or first generation students? So being able to understand like how to be able to turn things that like might be more open-ended, project-based, into something that you specifically want to add to your portfolio is definitely a good opportunity. I definitely would also recommend maybe taking some of the classes that are in the psychology department. I feel like I definitely missed out on them, but they're like super great opportunities there, where you're able to learn just about human factors in general. I mean, even if it's not super design related as a whole, you're able to just understand how does the design process work, how does design thinking work, even if it's for something like street design, or like if you're building a city, like even though that's not super relevant to you as a UX designer, it can be really important to just fix or like help you think about the world in a new way. And I think the last thing would probably just like get into opportunities where you can like just design, like even if it's just like designing for the essay, like literally just hop in there. Like at the end of the day, like if you got those graphic design skills set, it'll be easier for you to navigate into UX design, because I think the fundamentals of like understanding visuals is there already. And I think the last thing I'll plug is I think the HCI lab at Rice is really great. Even though it's not design heavy, you'll be able to understand like how user research works and be able to bring that into how you navigate your entire design process. So understanding like, how does user testing work? How do we test like which keyboard's better, etc. That helps you understand like how the other side of UX works, which is like UX research. So yeah, I think those are probably the best ways to get involved at Rice. I know the opportunities are super limited here, but it's definitely doable.
Awesome. And with that, we'll kind of open it up. So if anyone has a question that you'd like to ask Tina, you can type it in the chat, or feel free to just come off mute and ask away.
I actually have two questions. First of all, about the internships, did you have to have like any skills like Adobe Illustrator, or did you have to know anything before? or they could just like conclude it from your portfolio? Was there anything specific that they wanted to, that you had to know before?
Yeah, I think the only thing that you really had to know was just like fundamental like design tools. So whether it's Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, anything like that, I think just like having that solid basis of understanding how to use design tools and how to like show interactions with them is something that is super important. But I wouldn't say like anything like Illustrator or design was super important to me.
Okay, and the second thing would be, what would you recommend as a major? So if I have to decide on a major, like what would be the closest thing?
Um, I would probably say psychology because you're able to take a lot of things like all of the human factors class, human-centered design classes. But I think at the end of the day, like it doesn't really matter what you study. I think people aren't really concerned about like what you're studying versus like the work you're able to put out. But if you're more interested in being able to understand like human factors and human-centered design, like definitely like go for it. But I would definitely say like those classes don't necessarily cater towards like designers as a whole so much as just understanding like kind of like how everyday things kind of work. So it's up to you. I would definitely pick something that you're interested in versus like something that would like kind of send you towards a certain career path. Just because at the end of the day, like those classes probably aren't going to help you build your portfolio. It's probably more going to be like side work anyway. So if you're studying something that you're miserable in, it's probably not very conducive to the environment of you working on other things on the other side, like on like the side projects and stuff like that. Just make sure you're studying something that you're interested in. I think like for me, like sociology was just something that I was really interested in. It has really nothing to do with like my design goals and everything, but like I was happy just being able to just like learn about things just for the sake of learning.
And one last thing, do you recommend any like programming languages, or is this not required?
Through my experiences, it's like never been required just because
Okay.
there's like developers and everything.
Okay, thank you.
Stephanie, I see you have your hand up if you want to go ahead and ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure like what the protocol was supposed to be. I didn't want to like interrupt anyone. Yeah, but first, like, thank you so much for sharing. It was really inspiring to hear like that someone's able to get into like UX from Rice. And so I guess like my question was, when you decided to switch and like go into UX, like, can you talk a little bit more about how you made that like decision? I think it's like kind of scary, just like changing disciplines, especially if they're like so distinct or different, and like how you got that confidence. And then also if you were able to take any of your past experience and kind of market it or like use that when you were trying to get internships or trying to break into UX, and like how you were able to use like past experience or like relatively little experience in design to like get into UX.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's like a two-parter question, but for I think just like making that decision, I realized like through my like kind of college career, high school, like one thing that I like thought was consistent through my life was design. And so when I made that decision to become like drop out of pre-med, drop out all my classes, switch my major essentially, like all at the same time, it was definitely super scary. Like there's definitely like you have a lot of imposter syndrome. Like you start thinking like, what if I like don't get a job? Like the security in going to like med school is like way higher than like just trying to pursue a career that you might like have very little knowledge in. So I think the biggest thing I would say as a tip for that is that if you really feel like this is like something that you're passionate about, and to feel out whether you're passionate about it, it's really just like, do you enjoy doing the work? Like, would you see yourself like being happy doing that work type of work, like as a career? And if that answer is yes, then like I feel like that's pretty simple. I mean, like obviously easier said than done to just make that career switch, but yeah, like making that leap is definitely scary. Definitely been there before. But I think at the end of the day, you kind of know what's best for you in your gut and just making that switch. And I think the second part of your question, do you mind repeating it?
Yeah, sorry. It was just about how when you made that transition, I think you touched a lot actually about this in your presentation, but if you were able to take any of your experience with like your pre-med kind of background into marketing yourself, or if you had to kind of just self-teach yourself everything and use like that new experience, like if you were able to translate anything that you did before.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I kind of brought in, especially during my sophomore year, was I did a lot of research as a pre-med, and that was like one thing that I like kind of highlighted. But I think in general, when you're interviewing people, like especially a bunch of recruiters who might have never heard of Rice, and like definitely Rice doesn't have a good job of like bringing in UX recruiters and all that kind of stuff. So when you're marketing yourself as someone who doesn't go to like a traditional design school, who doesn't go to RISD, who doesn't go to Parsons, I think the best way to market yourself is like, I'm basically like, I can reach that level of how other people at design schools have like are at, and like without the resources that I have. So imagine like just how good I could be with those resources essentially. So just being able to kind of like self-market yourself as someone who's a self-learner, who like takes advantage of opportunities, being able to just like take criticism. I think one of the big things that a lot of like industries look for is like self-learners, because at the end of the day, like things are switching constantly. You might use Figma one day and then have to learn an entirely different program the next day. And if you can prove yourself as the self-learner, that's probably one of like the key things to like break into the industry, is being able to like market yourself as like, I take opportunities and I run with them essentially.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Anyone else has questions, just feel free to unmute and go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about the resources that you use to kind of teach yourself some of the basic concepts of UX.
Yeah, just like I can speak on that a little bit, but I think teaching yourself UX is like kind of hard. So I already had the background of understanding how to use like InDesign, Illustrator, and all that kind of stuff, but that's kind of like different when you go into things like Figma or Sketch. So when you go into like Figma, I think one of the key things to be able to understand is going online to just like look through resources. And I think one of the biggest things that helps me was like literally just sit down with an app that's well designed. Like if you sit down with Spotify and just look at how things interact. So like what does this do when I hold down on it? And what does this like, why did they choose to be able to just tap on it versus swipe on it? Being able to just like sit down and be like analyzing apps and be like, I wonder why they did that, and then bringing that into your own work of being like, this is really well designed, so how am I going to bring this into my work? But I think learning like Figma just in general, I think Figma has already a really great like blog resource where they can teach you a bunch of interactions, how animations work, etc. But in addition to that, it's probably just looking at other people's work. Like just go onto other people's portfolios and look at like, how do they do this interaction? How did I design this to look like this? Or how do I get this to scroll? Just to like, I think one of the biggest things that I did when I was like starting out was just like literally stalking every single portfolio that I could see. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Here, I have one more question as well. So given your like internship experience in design, do you have like an idea of what companies are really like renowned for their design and have, you know, really reputable design internships that maybe people who are interested in design and want to get some industry experience should look into?
Yeah. So I think, okay, so I'm just being honest, there's like top 3 companies that I think like are doing really great with design and everything. My first one that I will continue to brag about is definitely Spotify. Their entire like essentially structure of their industry, like of their company, is design based. So everything is very design focused, and I think that's something that a lot of like companies, like for example Amazon, might be missing out on, is like how much importance do they really put into their designers and how much do they value them. And I think through, like for example Spotify, you can really tell that they allocate a lot of resources to their designers, and like obviously they're able to put out really great work because of it. I think Lyft does a really great job just because they take into account a lot of accessibility issues. So they think a lot about like, what if someone's handicapped, or what if someone is blind when they're looking for a car or something like that. So I think one thing that a lot of designers miss out on is being able to design for accessibility. Like, what do we do for people who are old? What do we do for people who are handicapped, etc.? But I think Lyft does a really good job of being able to do that. And then third thing, even though kind of don't like them now, is Airbnb. Airbnb has a really nice like design. They like also like a very design focused. They have the same structure as Spotify. The only reason I'm like hesitant to say Airbnb is because they like canceled a bunch of internships really last minute, but definitely Airbnb. And lastly, obviously Hulu, like literally like they value their designers so much, and it's such a small I think when people think of Hulu, they usually think of like a lot of people, but the design team is so small and so tight knit that like you're able to really like take ownership of a project. So that's something that I would definitely recommend looking into when you're applying to things, is like, are they going to give you something like change this button, or are they going to give you an actual project that you're going to be able to have ownership over, that you're going to be able to present on, that you're going to be able to add something to your portfolio on. Because at the end of the day, like if you go into a job and they're giving you something that's a really small task that like really like it kind of just seems like nobody else wanted to do it, so they gave it to you. That's kind of like not where you want to be as an intern. You want to be like valued as somebody who's like also integral to the job. So just look into, I think one thing that might help is just like literally just look at like applications and be like, is this well designed? So like if you go into like, okay, I keep ragging on Amazon, but if you go into like Amazon, it's like not really well designed. Like, and I think by that, being able to analyze apps and be like, this is well designed, this is not, you can tell like how much importance they give to their designers.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point and really helpful insight. Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to just like enter them on the chat or unmute. Okay, cool. Well, Tina, thank you so much. This has been awesome to hear more about how we can get involved in design at Rice, as well as in industry. So yeah, huge hats off to you and all the great work you've done and kind of giving back to the Rice design community. We really appreciate it. And then for everyone else listening in, thank you so much for showing up. Stay tuned for more Rice design events because we have some great stuff coming your way. So, all right, thank you, everyone.